All right, let's dive into this one. The Bangladesh Liberation War, I feel like a lot of people have heard about it, but they might not totally understand it. So this should be an interesting deep dive. We've got a lot to cover here.
Yeah, there's a lot here. I mean, encyclopedia entries, potential firsthand accounts.
Wow, the whole wastus.
Yeah, should be interesting to unpack all this.
Okay, so if we want to understand this, we got to go back in time.
Okay.
Way back, like 1947.
All right.
British are leaving. India's gaining its independence, but there's a twist. India's going to be split into two countries. India and Pakistan.
Two countries based on religion.
Yeah, the two-nation theory. The idea that Hindus and Muslims are just so different. They can't coexist peacefully in one country.
And on paper, I guess it sounds straightforward enough, but
then you look at the map.
and you see Pakistan split into two wings.
Yeah.
West and East Pakistan separated by over 1,000 miles of India.
Awkward.
Talk about awkward neighbors. And it was a recipe for tension right from the start. And that distance wasn't just geographic.
It went deeper than that.
Much deeper. There were economic and cultural divides that were already causing a lot of resentment among Bengalis in the East.
So let's talk about those seeds of discontent.
Sure.
Like, one of the major issues was just straight up economic exploitation. East Pakistan had a much larger population,
Right.
but they got a way smaller slice of the economic pie.
Yeah, only 34% of total spending went to East Pakistan between 1950 and 1970.
Wild. I had no idea.
It's a shocking statistic when
Yeah.
you see it like that.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about the money, though. It was
What
about,
do you mean?
well, like respect,
Yeah.
recognition. Take the language dispute.
Okay, yeah. So in 1948, the government tried to impose Urdu as the only official language.
Right.
Which would have been fine, except in East Pakistan, pretty much everyone spoke Bengali.
It was a blatant attempt to impose West Pakistani dominance, and unsurprisingly, it backfired.
It caused huge protests.
Huge. The 1952 language movement really was a turning point.
It's interesting how this language dispute ended up having global implications.
How so?
Well, that movement is actually why February 21st is recognized as International Mother Language Day by UNESCO.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's pretty amazing.
And it wasn't just language. There were religious and cultural differences, too.
Of course. East Pakistan was way more diverse. They had a sizable Hindu population and a more secular outlook in general, versus West Pakistan, which was more strictly Islamic.
Yeah, and all of this was simmering beneath the surface, just waiting for a spark.
And unfortunately, that spark came in the form of a natural disaster.
The Bula cyclone.
In 1970, one of the deadliest cyclones in history slammed into East Pakistan.
This thing was devastating, killed nearly 500,000 people.
And the West Pakistani government's response to this disaster was,
Yeah.
to put it mildly, they fumbled the relief effort completely and appeared more focused on holding on to power than helping their own people.
It was a massive failure of leadership.
Absolutely. It fueled the feeling among Bengalis that they were viewed as second-class citizens.
And from all this turmoil and frustration, a new leader emerged.
Sheikh Mujibur Rahman.
With his Awami League.
Yep. They campaigned on a platform of greater autonomy for East Pakistan.
And one of their big things was this 6 points program.
Right. 6 specific demands aimed at addressing the inequalities between East and West Pakistan.
And then in the 1970 general election, the Awami League wins in a landslide.
You'd think that would have been it, a clear mandate for change.
You'd think so.
But the West Pakistani establishment, they refused to accept the results.
Seriously, they were that determined to cling to power that they ignored a democratic election.
They were willing to do whatever it took to maintain control, and that refusal to share power was like lighting a fuse.
I can't even imagine the frustration in East Pakistan. Like your voices, your votes, none of it mattered.
And the response from West Pakistan was swift and brutal. On March 25, 1971, they launched Operation Searchlight.
Oh, yeah, I read about this. That was terrifying.
It was a full-blown crackdown aimed at silencing any opposition.
I mean, it's crazy. They literally expelled all the foreign journalists right before it started.
They knew what was coming.
And they wanted to keep it under wraps.
As much as possible. They targeted anyone they perceived as a threat.
Bengali civilians, intellectuals, students, anyone who dared to speak out.
Universities and cultural centers were attacked, even Hindu dormitories.
It was systematic and horrifying.
Absolutely. Bangladesh considers these events a genocide with estimates of up to 3 million people killed.
But Pakistan claims it was way lower.
They say closer to 26,000.
That's a huge discrepancy.
It's a sensitive issue with different narratives, and we have to acknowledge that.
Yeah, for sure. What's undeniable, though, is that widespread violence happened.
Absolutely. And those events were a defining moment for the people of Bangladesh.
And it's in the face of all that brutality that on March 26, 1971, Bangladesh declares its independence.
A bold move.
A defiant act of self-determination.
In the face of overwhelming odds.
And it marked the beginning of a 9-month war for liberation.
With the Pakistani army on one side, determined to crush the rebellion.
And on the other side,
the Mukti Bahini, the Bengali resistance fighters.
One of the most interesting stories from this period is Major Ziaur Rahman.
His radio broadcast calling on the Bengali people to resist was incredibly powerful.
It was a pivotal moment. I mean, it's amazing how a single voice
can rally a nation.
Especially during a crisis like that. But the war itself was brutal, a mix of guerrilla warfare and conventional battles.
And it wasn't just Bengali versus Pakistani either.
Right. Pakistan used local collaborators called Razakars.
Which added another layer of complexity and heartbreak to the conflict.
And then there's the whole international response to the war. It was a tangled web of Cold War politics and alliances.
The United States under President Nixon was firmly in Pakistan's corner.
I mean, they even sent the USS Enterprise to the Bay of Bengal.
A very clear show of force.
While the Soviet Union sided with India and Bangladesh.
Providing crucial support and essentially counterbalancing the U.S. influence.
It was a proxy war playing out on the world stage.
Yeah, and the UN, they condemned human rights violations, but they were largely ineffective in stopping the war.
So you had all this maneuvering going on at the higher levels, but on the ground.
The Bengali people were relentless in their fight for freedom.
They helped the Mukti Bahini and the Indian forces in any way they could.
It was a true people's war.
The Bengalis were fighting for their homes, their families, their identity.
Exactly. And their resilience in the face of such overwhelming odds is truly inspiring. And finally, after 9 long months of fighting on December 16, 1971, the Pakistani army surrendered in Dhaka.
It's like the whole world must have breathed a sigh of relief that day.
For Bangladesh, it was pure jubilation. It was the moment they'd been fighting for, the culmination of years of struggle and sacrifice. But it also meant a whole new set of challenges.
So many challenges. I mean, think about it. A nation born out of war, with scars both physical and emotional.
Rebuilding wasn't just about infrastructure.
It was about healing.
Healing a nation's soul. So where do you even begin after something like that?
Right, where do you start? I mean, for Bangladesh, one of the first hurdles was getting other countries to even recognize them as a legitimate country.
India was a strong ally, of course, but other countries, especially those aligned with Pakistan, they were a little more hesitant.
It's amazing how even after a victory like that, geopolitics still plays such a huge role.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Bangladesh had to figure out its place on the world stage. And the Shimla Agreement in 1972 was a big step in that direction.
Okay, the Shimla Agreement, what was that exactly?
Well, it was essentially a peace treaty between India and Pakistan. And the key thing here is that Pakistan finally officially recognized Bangladesh.
So they finally admitted defeat.
Yes, but it was a carefully negotiated agreement. Pakistan got something they really wanted.
Which was?
They got back over 93,000 prisoners of war.
Wow, 93,000.
That's a huge number.
But
there's another question that comes up here.
What's that?
What about those accused of war crimes during the conflict? What happened to them?
Did they face any sort of justice?
It's complicated. The Shimla Agreement prioritized reconciliation and stability, so India decided not to pursue war crimes trials.
So to keep the peace, they kind of had to let justice take a backseat.
In a way, yes. It was a complex decision with long-lasting implications. Pakistan, on the other hand, they did set up their own commission to investigate what happened on their side.
So they were at least willing to look into it.
They were. It was called the Hamadur Rahman Commission. But their report was actually suppressed for years because it was pretty critical of the Pakistani military.
So they found some things they didn't like.
They did. When the report finally came out, it confirmed that there were atrocities and human rights violations.
So there was an admission of guilt, but no real accountability.
Sadly, it's a pattern we see a lot in history. Figuring out justice for the victims of war is rarely simple.
It's true. There are always so many layers. And I guess the Bangladesh Liberation War is a great example of that. I mean, even today, the legacy of that conflict continues to shape the relationship between those two countries.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the political relationships either.
What do you mean?
This war had a deep impact on Bangladesh's identity as a nation. It was a collective trauma for sure, but it also became a source of immense pride.
It's like they went through a trial by fire and came out stronger on the other side.
Exactly. The sacrifices that were made, the stories of heroism, it all became woven into Bangladesh's national narrative. I mean, just look at the art, the literature, the memorials that were inspired by the war.
I was reading about some of those. The Smriti Shudo monument sounds incredible.
It is. It's this stunning tribute to those who died in the war. It's a really powerful place.
And what about literature? Are there any books or poems that stand out to you?
There are so many. One that really stuck with me was Ami Virangana Bolchi.
What's that one about?
It's a collection of first-hand accounts from women who were victims of sexual violence during the war.
That's something that's so important to talk about because it doesn't always get acknowledged in wartime.
You're right, it often gets brushed under the rug. But this book gives voice to these women's experiences. It's heartbreaking, but also incredibly powerful.
It shows how resilient people can be.
Even in the face of unimaginable suffering.
There's another one that I read about Akatar Dinguli.
Oh yeah, that one's a memoir that offers a glimpse into the everyday lives of ordinary people who were just trying to survive.
It sounds like an important read for anyone who wants to understand what it was actually like to live through that war.
It really humanizes the conflict.
It's a good reminder that war isn't just about battles and generals.
It's about the human cost.
The families that are torn apart.
And the dreams that are shattered.
It's amazing how something as horrific as war can also inspire incredible acts of bravery and compassion.
Yeah, it really shows you what people are capable of, even under incredible pressure.
So we've covered so much ground in this deep dive into the Bangladesh Liberation War.
We have.
It's been a wild ride so far. But as we wrap up, what do you think is like the biggest takeaway from all of this? Like what really stands out to you?
You know, it's interesting because this war is almost like a historical crossroads. You've got all these different forces at play.
What do you mean?
Well, you see the legacy of colonialism, the Cold War happening in the background, the rise of nationalism.
Yeah.
And then these really personal struggles over identity.
Like the language dispute.
Exactly. Religious differences, cultural clashes. It all comes together in this one event. I think it reminds us that history isn't linear.
It's not just a straight line.
Not at all. It's more like a tangled web of events and ideas.
Like a giant tapestry.
Yeah, with all these different threads woven together. And the Bangladesh Liberation War really embodies that with its global implications and its lasting legacy.
Speaking of legacies, I've noticed that different sources use all sorts of terms to describe this conflict.
Oh, yeah?
Like Pakistani Civil War or Indo-Pakistani War of 1971.
Right.
And then, of course, Bangladesh Liberation War.
Which is interesting because it shows how even the language we use is loaded.
It's not just about choosing the right words.
No, each term carries a different perspective, a way of framing the events. Sometimes it reflects certain biases or agendas.
So it's really about power and interpretation.
Exactly. Take the term Pakistani Civil War.
Okay.
That kind of downplays the role of Bengali nationalism.
And minimizes how brutal the Pakistani state was.
Right. Then you have Indo-Pakistani War,
which focuses mainly on the military side of things.
But misses that larger fight for self-determination.
And then there's Bangladesh Liberation War,
which is the term they officially use in Bangladesh.
It makes sense. It centers the Bengali perspective.
Yeah, their struggle for freedom.
Their right to exist as an independent nation.
It's about recognizing their voice in their own history.
Which is so important. Wow, this whole conversation has really been eye-opening. The Bangladesh Liberation War is often seen as this triumph of the human spirit.
For good reason. The courage of the Mukti Bahini, the sacrifices of everyday people, India's support.
It's a story of perseverance against all odds.
Absolutely. A reminder that even when things seem impossible,
people can overcome incredible challenges.
But we can't forget the cost of that victory.
The millions of lives lost.
The families displaced.
The trauma that still lingers.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
Even in moments of triumph, we have to make space for reflection.
For remembering those who suffered.
And for learning from the past. I think the Bangladesh Liberation War, with all its complexity, poses a really important question.
What's that?
What does it truly mean for a nation to be born out of such struggle? How does a memory like that shape a country moving forward?
Especially a young country like Bangladesh.
It affects their politics, their culture, their sense of who they are.
Those are some really powerful questions, and I hope our listeners will keep exploring them long after this deep dive is over.
Me too. We've only scratched the surface here.
There's so much more to uncover.
So keep digging, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into this incredible story.
And until next time, keep exploring it over.